So one of the things that is interesting for parents is that we tend to feel like our response to our kids is the most important, which is not untrue. Kids starts to talk to you about questions, about doubts, about fears, about who they are, and we can react really, really well. And even if we're part of a really affirming church community, there can be things that are said from the pulpit or by ministry leaders that may not align with what we want our kids to learn or feel about themselves. And one of the problems that a lot of parents face is that kids can hold the parents accountable for the words of the pastor. It's something that I've seen with a lot of my clients, both kids and adults, that the pastor is seen as an extension of mom and dad. So mom and dad are the model for how we understand God, and the pastor is really the voice of God enacted in a lot of these traditions. And so if the pastor says it, a lot of times it's seen as truth. And that's especially true if mom and dad aren't willing to have the conversation that say, hey, we don't really agree with what he said. He or she or they said that it doesn't have to be fact just because it comes from the pastor. And so an important piece for parents within this is engage in a dialogue with your kids. I think it can be hard sometimes to be able to identify effectively what the comments or the phrases that are going to stick out to kids are. But if you notice something that you feel like might have an impact on your kid on the drive home, hey, what did you think about this? How did it feel when this was said? What do you think? And that can start from tiny, tiny kids in early preschool, Sunday school classes, all the way up through teenagers and young adults. Opening up that dialogue and saying, "What is this like for you? How does this sit with you?" Sometimes the things that you think might be a problem for your kid, they're like, "Yeah, whatever, it's not a big deal." And the things that you don't even notice, your kid may come to you and say, "Hey, this kind of hurt. I don't know what to do with it." By opening up that dialogue as a parent, you're really inviting your children to start to have those conversations with you and to voice those opinions. Um, I think it's also important to recognize as a parent, though, that you may be put in a position to have to go to bat for your kid. One example stands out to me very strongly that there was a kid who was pretty hurt by some of the things that were said by a pastor. And mom and dad were receptive to that and went to the pastor and had some private conversations and engaged with him on those points. But in working with the kiddo, kid didn't realize that that had happened. And so there was a lot of hurt and a lot of betrayal that the pastor said this and you didn't do anything about it. And the kid just didn't know that mom and dad had actually done a lot of advocacy. And so when you find yourself in a position of being an advocate for your kid within your faith community, it's really important to bring them in on that dialogue. If you feel like it's inappropriate to have them in the meeting specifically, that's fair. But take some time to write down what are things that you want me to talk to them about? What are questions you want me to ask? What are things that you wanted to know about your experience? And being willing to give your kid kind of a debrief about, here's what he or she said, here's how the conversation went, here's what we're going to do about it. Um, Kids a lot of times will feel pretty empowered depending on how they're engaging with their faith structure to be able to have those conversations themselves. If it's a youth pastor who said something, it's always a good idea to encourage kids. Well, why don't we talk to them about it? And if you want to drive that conversation, I'll support you. If you want me to drive that conversation, I'm more than happy to do that. But it really teaches your kids to question the things that they're given. There's some critical thinking that can happen in that. And especially with kids who don't fit into the binary or the standard way of experiencing faith, it's extremely important that they have the confidence to be able to ask the questions and to push back where it's necessary. When we don't empower our kids to do that, those ideologies can get swallowed whole and really emphasize that shame and that stigma that leads to that division of good and bad later in life and plays out in a lot of different ways. Um, and so inviting your kid into the conversation, into the dialogue with the pastor, with the ministry leader, with whoever it is, can be really, really important in not only forming their faith, but also teaching them how to advocate for themselves within a structure that may feel like there's a power dynamic. There are different faith structures and even different churches that the ability to question isn't something that we really push into. I think one of the things that's important as parents and as kids within that situation is that faith is something that is both a communal thing and a very personal thing. And it can be hard to expect your child who's 9, 10, 11 years old to be navigating these questions of faith and internal conviction when they're navigating it in a situation that may be less than supportive around that. And so as a parent, it can be important to create a distinction between this is what we're taught and this is what we believe, or this is what one view is and here's another view. And as a parent, if that's not something that is comfortable for you, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's important to be aware that your kid may push back against that a little bit, especially in a place that we are taught to swallow everything that we're given. It can lead to a lot of resentment and it can lead to a lot of fear. And I think parents can sometimes find themselves in a position that they have to choose whether they're going to align with their child or their faith community. I've seen this with gender, I've seen this with sexuality, that when we really get into the weeds about theology and how we stand and what all these things mean, it gets very easy for kids to believe that parents are choosing theology over relationship with them. And so you as a parent actually have a really cool opportunity to form their understanding of faith, and understand what self-affirmation and healthy spirituality is. Some of us are raised in a church and stay there our entire lives, and it's been generations and generations before. Some people bounce around, and sometimes we hit a point that is ideologically or spiritually incompatible with our convictions, and we're forced to take a stand. And I think within those situations, it's important to teach your kids to have the dialogue, to ask the questions, to engage, like we talked about, but knowing where your lines are. Like a lot of times we'll talk about non-negotiables. That there are a lot of things that are kind of gray areas within any faith structure, any ideology. There are things that we can agree to disagree on, and there are sometimes that this is a hill that I'm willing to die on. And it's important that if you hit those hills, you have those conversations with your kids, and you go, "Hey, we're going to find a different church because of this, and this is something we've talked about, and this is the way that we've looked at it." And really, within that process, you get to model to your kids what it looks like to create a dialogue, to have communication, and to make a decision that is in line with who they are, that is affirming of who they are. Parents get to serve really as a bridge between their kid and their faith structure. And that really does, on a broader scale, serve as a bridge between kid and God. That they learn how to relate and engage with God based on the ways that they see you doing this individually and in community. And so engaging in the conversations and being able to have the questions and the discussions, and to affirm that your kid doesn't have to take care of you. Hey, I love you either way. I love you no matter what you do, no matter who you are. All of these pieces of you are important to me. They matter, and you couldn't make me prouder of you by anything that you do or don't do. Make sure that that is a message that is pretty constant. Anytime that you have a time of parenting that you go, hey, I need to correct this behavior. Hey, I need to address this. It's important to create a distinction between we're addressing the behavior because it's not safe or it's ineffective or it's going to hurt you or other people, not because you're wrong or you're bad or there's something damaged about you. And so those basic parenting interventions that we have really can translate to the faith structure in some pretty pronounced ways. Sometimes, or a lot of times, when kids come out to parents, and especially parents with a strong faith basis, it can leave you feeling like you really have to choose your kid or your faith. And the good news is that you don't. There is nothing that says that they're mutually exclusive or one trumps the other. And I think that there's actually a lot of risk in thinking like that. There's been a movement in therapy that says, hey, if your religion doesn't fit your identity, lose your religion. The other side of the fence is if your religion doesn't fit your identity, lose your identity. And neither of those are really healthy. So cohesive identity gets to be both. And I've seen countless families who have navigated this really, really well. There are periods that are rough. There's hard conversations. Oftentimes, it leaves parents really having to assess their theology, figure out what they believe, how they stand, and then come to their kids to be able to say, here's how I've learned from you. Here's how I've grown. And it strengthens the relationship. It strengthens the relationship between child and parent. It strengthens the relationship between parent and God, child and God. It can be a really healthy, really cohesive, really integrating experience. So even through those hard questions and even through the discomfort, having to really push into what you believe and what you don't, remember that there is light at the other end of that tunnel and that things will work out and they can work out really effectively. Just don't be afraid to engage in hard conversations.